Taiwan took the center stage as U.S. President Joe Biden and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping met for a virtual summit. The talks were held in a cordial manner, but the tensions remained palpable. Xi Jinping warned the U.S. on Taiwan, saying that it was playing with fire. So what exactly did Joe Biden say on Taiwan? He tried to strike a balancing act. Biden said that Washington maintains its long-standing policy of recognizing the One China policy guided by the Taiwan Relations Act. But the American president also warned that the U.S. opposes any unilateral efforts to change the status quo of Taiwan. Remember, China claims sovereignty over self-ruled Taiwan. Naturally, Biden's comments irked China. Beijing warned America against crossing what it calls the red line on Taiwan and that it would respond to any provocations.
Xi Jinping stressed that for China to achieve full reunification is the shared aspiration of all Chinese people, and we are willing to put our full efforts for peaceful reunification. But if Taiwan independence forces provoke us, force our hands or even cross the red line, we will have no choice but to take decisive measures. On issues concerning China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, China does not have any room for compromise.
The U.S. has maintained that it wants talks with China to be substantive and not symbolic. During the 3-hour-long talks, the two leaders agreed that there was a need to avert competition from turning into conflict. Biden also brought up concerns over alleged human rights violations by China in Xinjiang, Tibet, as well as Hong Kong. He also stressed on the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific, climate change, as well as the global energy supply crisis, also discussed during those talks. Notably, trade did not feature heavily in the talks between the leaders of the world's two biggest economies. While Biden warned China against unfair economic practices, the issue of trade remained missing in the official release by the two countries. And this video call came as tensions continue to rise between Taipei and Beijing, where the Chinese president warned that China would respond to provocations on Taiwan. The U.S. assured China that it stands by the One China principle. Biden reiterated America's long-standing support for the One China policy, under which it officially recognizes Beijing rather than Taipei. The U.S. also recognizes the Taiwan Relations Act, which makes it clear that America's decision to establish diplomatic ties with Beijing instead of Taiwan rests upon the expectation that the future of Taiwan will be determined by peaceful means. That act binds the U.S. to provide Taiwan with the means to defend itself. In the 3-hour-long talks on Monday, Xi Jinping warned Joe Biden that China would respond to provocations on Taiwan, also telling the American president that his country would have to take decisive measures if pro-Taiwan independence forces crossed the red line. Biden and Xi Jinping have not had a face-to-face meeting since Biden took over as president, and the last time they spoke was via the phone in September. The Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said that China was given assurances that America adheres to the One China policy and does not support Taiwan's independence.
Full reunification is the shared aspiration of all Chinese people, and we are willing to put our full efforts for peaceful reunification. But if Taiwan independence forces provoke us, force our hands or even cross the red line, we will have no choice but to take decisive measures. On issues concerning China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, China does not have any room for compromise.
After that video call, the United States urged China to stop its military activities near Taiwan. In a statement, the U.S. State Department says, and I'm quoting, the U.S. is very concerned by the People's Republic of China's provocative military activities near Taiwan, which is destabilizing risks, miscalculations, and undermining regional peace and stability. The White House has also said, and I'm quoting, on Taiwan, President Biden underscored that the U.S. strongly opposes unilateral efforts to change the status quo or undermine peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Residents in Beijing and Shanghai expressed mixed feelings about the recent virtual meeting between the two leaders. While several residents in Shanghai and Beijing said the meeting was a positive development, a Beijing resident said it seemed difficult for the two sides to reach a consensus.
This meeting is a really sensitive topic for average people in China. People are especially concerned about whether China-US relations can be eased after the meeting between leaders and whether the two countries can reach a consensus. So far, it seems difficult. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or whoever, their attitudes towards China are hard to predict, but our country isn't afraid of that.
America's support to self-ruled island of Taiwan is imperative for its survival. Of late, Taiwan has reported 148 Chinese Air Force planes in the southern and southwestern part of its air defense zone over a 4-day period beginning on Friday. China claims self-ruled Taiwan as its sacred territory and has not ruled out the use of force to ensure eventual unification. Taiwan says it is an independent country and will defend its freedoms and democracy, blaming China for the tensions. And for more on these developments, joining us on the broadcast from Taipei is Brian Hu, who is the founding editor of New Bloom magazine. Thanks very much for being here with us. Also with us is our correspondent Susan Teherani, joining us from New York. Coming to you first, Brian, what is your assessment of how prominently Taiwan featured during those talks?
Yeah, so it is quite interesting that in this period of increased tensions, Taiwan has taken such a place of precedence. Apart from Taiwan, it was also expected that they would discuss China's recent nuclear buildup, trade issues regarding supply chains, trade tensions, etc. That was put to the side. However, Taiwan actually does feature quite prominently in this, in that Taiwan manufactures over half the world's semiconductors. This is crucial to American and also Chinese supply chains. And Taiwan is, in terms of trade, caught between the U.S. and China as well. And so these issues are interrelated in that sense.
What do you make of the comments specifically by Joe Biden when it comes to safeguarding Taiwan's interests?
So this is quite interesting because Biden has actually flip-flopped a few times in recent memory. Earlier, last month, he claimed that initially, after speaking with Xi, following these military threats, that he and Xi had agreed to abide by the quote-unquote Taiwan agreement. There is no such agreement. And so this was seen as compromising to China, as though the U.S. and China have an agreed position on Taiwan when they do not. But later on, Biden, in a town hall meeting, seemed to express U.S. commitment to defend Taiwan. The U.S. does not have this commitment to defend Taiwan. The official stance is strategic ambiguity, not making it clear what the U.S. would do in the event of a Chinese invasion. And so there was concerns ahead of time that Biden would perhaps compromise again or venture off script again after his meeting with Xi. And so there is this concern.
Right. Let's get in, Susan, also onto that conversation. What is the larger message that the American president tried to send out through these talks, specifically on Taiwan, a balancing act once again on the issue?
Yeah, I think it was really important regarding the message that the United States and the White House wanted to send out regarding Taiwan, notably after that flip-flop by the president on where it stands. It did reiterate America's longstanding policy of the one China policy and the strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan. But on the other hand, President Biden really went into this meeting prepared, whether or not regarding Taiwan or other aspects of its relations with China. And it played on its diplomatic advantages. It really went in with an alliance formed with AUKUS. It had the backing of the Quad. It was a meeting that was shortly after a trip coming out of Europe. How effective NATO is in its alliance or not, at least symbolically, it has the backing of Europe. And for what it's worth, Xi hasn't really left China in 2 years since COVID started. So the United States really had the upper hand in that regard going into these meetings. And in the bigger picture, when you look at it, despite the fact and despite the rhetoric that Xi wanted to put out in quote unquote playing with fire, you can't really underestimate the fact that he's really a few steps away from readying a hypersonic armed conflict in the Strait of Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait. And I think Joe Biden wanted to make clear that, that's not the path to go. And the United States would be ready, despite its longstanding policy, to prevent that from happening.
Right. Let me get in a quick reaction from Brian on that. As per Chinese state media, President Xi Jinping warned that America's support for Taiwanese independence is like playing with fire. We have heard that very phrase earlier on as well. Further saying that some people in the U.S. intend to use Taiwan to control China. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I think Xi will play this up in order to paint Taiwan as being the provocateur, as though Taiwan is inviting this or provoking conflict by pushing for Taiwanese independence. However, you look at what President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan is doing, it is actually quite a moderate position in terms of preserving de facto independence, just wanting to be left alone by China. And so I think this is China's attempt to frame this differently. If you look at the press readouts from China and the U.S., for example, there's a claim in the Chinese readout that both sides had agreed that Taiwanese independence must be opposed, whereas the U.S. readout did not actually say that. It just stressed the continuing reliance on the One China policy, which is actually that Taiwan's position is still officially undecided by the U.S. It is not actually saying that, well, there is an agreement between the U.S. and China on Taiwan. But the Chinese government oftentimes tries to conflate this, conflating its own One China principle with the U.S. One China policy.
Right, let's also talk about the other issues that were discussed. Susan, President Biden was also clear on the need to protect American industries from China's unfair trade and economic practices. Not just that, he also spoke about the importance of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Take us through the key takeaways on the discussions on these two issues.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about not only the militarization of the South China Sea and China's exploitation of vulnerabilities to bore deeply into the computer networks of American companies. This is according to the White House readout, and especially defense contractors. But also, while we didn't really hear much about trade practices, it was really important that the president also wanted to touch on the economic issues between the two sides, because it's something that's very important to the American people. We didn't get specifics on what the president talked about, but definitely about cyber hacking and intellectual property theft and forced technology transfer. Those were something that the president had on the agenda as well. And even in his introductory statements, he urged China and Xi in particular to play by the rules. He was talking about the Indo-Pacific region and saying that there's one rule for all, talking and adhering and alluding to international rules, norms and regulations, and calling on China to basically take a step back from taking the rogue actions that it has, not only in the Indo-Pacific, but on a wider scale as well. So those were topics of discussion. But what was interesting was, and it was predictable, but didn't get much coverage before the talks, was that they also talked about Iran, possibly the Iran nuclear deal and the fallout, and what possibly won't be a deal moving forward with the Islamic Republic, and also the situation in Afghanistan as well. Remember, both countries are members of the United Nations Security Council. They have veto power. Those two issues are very important moving forward as well, possibly areas of cooperation, but we'll have to wait and see.